بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So carrying on then with the three fundamental principles for children. Yesterday we got to the section where the Sheikh was saying that there are a few important affairs for all of us to understand. The first one was that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us and provided for us and then sent to us a messenger to guide us. So those are a few parts. Firstly, Allah created us and there is no one, nothing else at all that aided or participated with Allah in creating us and creating the universe. Allah created the whole of the universe alone. The second part was that Allah then provided for us too all of the food and the drink and everything we have that is provided for the creation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. And again, there is no one else, nothing else that participates with Allah in providing for the creation. Allah is the one who created the creation, provided for the creation, gives life and death to the creation. All of those are actions of Allah alone. And then we had mentioned yesterday that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't just create us and provide for us and then leave us without any purpose. In reality, the purpose Allah created us for is to worship Him. And so He sent us a messenger, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, to teach us about Islam, to guide us to Islam and the correct understanding and practice of it, to teach us how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala properly. And so whoever obeys the messenger, then they enter paradise. And whoever does not obey the messenger, then they enter the hellfire. And we mentioned that example yesterday about Musa alayhi salam, Moses. He was sent at the time to Pharaoh and the disbelievers who were with Pharaoh. He was sent to them to give them da'wah, but Pharaoh refused to accept the da'wah of Musa alayhi salam, and as a consequence he will be from the people of the hellfire. The second thing that we had mentioned yesterday, the second principle or the second point, was that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not pleased, does not accept that anyone associates partners alongside Him, that anybody worships others alongside Him, that anybody worships or makes dua to anyone else along with Allah. Allah does not accept that, and Allah is not pleased with that. Even if a person was worshipping an angel who may be up in the heavens, or even if a person was worshipping a prophet who Allah selected and sent to us, all of that would still be wrong, because it is impermissible to worship anyone besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we had mentioned the ayah in the Quran yesterday, وَأَنَّ الْمَسَاجِدَ لِلَّهِ فَلَا تَدْعُوا مَعَ اللَّهِ أَحَدًا. that indeed the mosques are for Allah. So do not call upon others alongside Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The next point that we're going to start with today then is where the Shaykh he mentions أن من أطاع الرسول ووحد الله لا يجوز له موالاة من حاد الله ورسوله ولو كان أقرب قريب. That the person who obeys Allah and worships Allah alone without any partners along with him, then it is not permissible for such a person, for such believers, it is not permissible for them to love shirk or to love the people of shirk. It is not permissible to love shirk or the people of shirk and to have the bond of love and closeness and aid and support for the people of shirk and those who are upon shirk, and they are the people who associate partners alongside Allah, meaning they worship others besides Allah. They worship maybe the dead people in their graves, or they worship other beings or deities or other gods as they claim besides Allah. Then the believer cannot love those kinds of people. You cannot love people who are worshipping other gods along with Allah. That does not mean that a person behaves badly towards anyone. Islam does not teach us to be bad towards people. You must still behave with a good manner and to try to explain to those people about Islam so that they enter Islam, they enter into Islam and they accept it, insha'Allah. And the evidence is لا تجد قوما يؤمنون بالله واليوم الآخر يوادون من حاد الله ورسوله ولو كانوا آباءهم أو أبناءهم أو إخوانهم أو عشيرتهم أولئك كتب في قلوبهم الإيمان وأيدهم بروح منه ويدخلهم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها رضي الله عنهم ورضوا عنه أولئك حزب الله ألا إن حزب الله هم المفلحون. Here Allah tells us in the Quran that you will not find anyone who believes in Allah and the last day loving those people who oppose and disobey Allah and His Messenger, even if those people are their own fathers or their own brothers or their own tribes. Those are the ones, the believers are the ones who Allah has written Imām into their hearts and has aided them with the revelation and will enter them into paradise where rivers flow from under the gardens and they will live therein forever, and Allah is pleased with them and they are pleased with Him. They are the party of Allah, they are the group of Allah, and indeed those who are with Allah, the group of Allah, they are the ones who will be successful. The point of that is to highlight that a believer does not love shirk and does not love the people who are committing shirk, who are worshipping other gods along with Allah. But like we said, that doesn't mean that you behave bad towards anyone, but you behave with a good way and try to explain to them about Islam so that maybe they will accept Islam. Then after that, in the book it says, اعلم أرشدك الله لطاعته. Know, may Allah guide you to His obedience. أن الحنيفية ملة إبراهيم أن تعبد الله مخلصا له الدين وبذلك أمر الله جميع الناس وخلقهم لها. He says you need to know that Al-Hanifiyya is the way of the people of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Ibrahim alayhi salam, Abu al-Anbiya, as he is known as, the father of the prophets, Abraham, Ibrahim alayhi salam, because all of the other prophets, they came from his grandchildren, from his offspring, from his lineage. All of them came from that family tree of Ibrahim alayhi salam. So he is known as Abu al-Anbiya, the father of the prophets. Al-Hanifiyya is to be upon the religion of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And the religion of Ibrahim alayhi salam, Abraham, was the religion of Tawheed, of worshipping Allah alone. And in fact, all of the prophets and messengers who were sent, their religion was the religion of Tawheed, of worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, and not associating any partners with Him whatsoever. That was the religion of all of the prophets and messengers, Ibrahim and Musa and Isa alayhim as-salam, and the final messenger, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So Hanifiyya are the people of Tawheed, the people who worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. And that's what it says in the book, أن تعبد الله مخلصا له الدين, that you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sincerely. Sincerity means worshipping Allah alone and not worshipping any other gods. Because many people, they worship the graves, and some of them they used to worship, and they still do, the trees and the stones and the sun and the moon. You have people who worship the sun and people who worship the moon. But the reality of Tawheed, of worshipping Allah alone, is that you do not worship anyone else alongside Allah. Not the sun, the moon, or anything. It is only Allah alone to be worshipped. That is Al-Hanifiyya. And that was the religion of Ibrahim alayhi salam and all of the other prophets and messengers who came. And then in the book it says, وَبِذَلِكَ أَمَرَ اللَّهُ جَمِيعَ النَّاسِ, that Tawheed is what Allah commanded all of the people with. Allah commanded all of the people to worship Him upon Tawheed, to worship Him alone, and to not be associating any other partners alongside Him. This is what Allah commanded all of the creation to do. And we know that because Allah told us that in the Quran. Allah told us in the Quran, He commanded everybody to worship Him alone. So in the Quran, Allah said, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. But I did not create the humans or the jinn except for them to worship me. Allah tells us He didn't create the jinn or the humans for any other reason. He created the jinn and the humans so that we could worship Allah. That's the reason why He created us. And that's what this life is. It is a test to see who will do that and who won't. Who will spend their lives worshipping Allah, praying their prayers every day, doing what you have to do as a Muslim every day. And who are the people who don't care and they won't do that? That's the test. The ones who do it all and they obey the messenger, they do what the messenger told us, they will be in paradise. And the ones who do not do that and they don't practice Islam, they don't do the things that a Muslim is supposed to do every day in his life, then they are going to be the ones who end up in the hellfire. So Allah tells us, I didn't create the jinn or the humans for any other reason except for them to worship me. And the meaning of ya'budun, for them to worship me, is liyuwahidun, that they will worship me alone. That Allah created us to worship Him alone, not alongside anybody else. And then in the book it says, وَأَعْظَمُ مَا أَمَرَ اللَّهُ بِهِ, and the greatest thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded us with, from all of the things we've been told to do as Muslims, what is the biggest thing that Allah commanded us and told us to do? It is at-tawheed. And we've said that a lot of times already, and we're saying it again in this part. The greatest thing, the biggest thing that Allah wants from us is to worship Him alone. Because on the Day of Judgment, that's how people are going to be split up. The people who used to worship only Allah, they'll go on one side. And the people who used to worship other gods along with Allah, they'll go on the other side. The ones who used to worship only Allah, that side, all of those will enter paradise. And on the other side, the ones who used to worship other gods with Allah, they'll go to hellfire. That's why it is the most important thing. The Prophet ﷺ, when he became a prophet, he spent 23 years telling people about Tawheed, that they need to worship Allah alone and not to associate any partners, not to worship any other gods along with Allah. Only Allah alone. Dua to Allah alone. Prayer for Allah alone. Your fasting Ramadan for Allah alone. Your Hajj for Allah only. All of your worship purely for Allah and not to be associated to anyone else or given to anybody else. So the biggest thing that Allah commanded us to do is to worship Him alone upon Tawheed. And the biggest thing, the greatest thing that Allah told us not to do is the opposite, shirk. The biggest thing that Allah told us to do is worship Him alone. And the biggest thing that Allah warned us about and told us not to do is shirk, which is associating partners with Him, worshipping other gods along with Him. That is the worst sin that a person can do. وَهُوَ دَعْوَةُ غَيْرِهِ مَعَهُ, and that is worshipping other gods along with Allah. That is the worst thing that a person can do, the worst sin that a person can do. Because all of the different sins that a person does, you can be forgiven. But there is one sin, if you do it and then you die and you never took it back, then you won't be forgiven. That is the sin of shirk. In the Quran, Allah told us, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَغْفِرُ أَن يُشْرَكَ بِهِ وَيَغْفِرُ مَا دُونَ ذَلِكَ لِمَنْ يَشَاءُ. That Allah does not forgive that you commit shirk, that you worship other gods along with Him. But He forgives all other sins to whoever He wants. All of the other sins can be forgiven. But the sin of shirk, if you die on that and you don't take it back before you die, then that is the one thing that is not forgiven by Allah. And so that is the biggest sin that a person can do, shirk, worshipping other gods or stones or trees or people or angels or prophets or anything along with Allah. And the evidence is in the Quran. Allah told us that in the Quran. In one part Allah said, وَاعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا. Worship Allah alone and do not make any partners along with Him. Worship Allah alone and do not make any partners along with Him. Don't worship any other gods along with Him. Don't go to the graves and make dua to the dead people thinking they will help you. Don't even go to the graves of the prophets, not even the grave of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and make dua to him thinking he's going to answer your dua. All of that is calling upon others besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So all of that is a type of shirk. You are now calling upon and making dua to others instead of Allah. And that is the greatest sin. So here, that's why Allah said in the Quran, وَاعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا. Worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and do not associate any partners with Him. That is the section we'll finish off on for today. And inshallah ta'ala, from next Monday, we'll carry on with the next section. And the next section is actually the first principle. So far, what we've done in these first 6 sessions, or 5 sessions, there was an introduction and then 5 sessions. We've been doing an overall introduction from the book. From next session on Monday next week, we are going to start the first actual principle from the 3 principles. And remember, the first principle was about knowing who Allah is. If somebody says to you, who is Allah? Then how are you going to answer them? What are the things that you need to remember to be able to tell someone if they ask you, who is Allah? You need to be able to answer that question properly. So that is what we're going to look at from the next session, next week, Monday and then Tuesday, both days, 7 p.m. GMT, the British time, inshallah ta'ala. And we'll conclude upon that for today then. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.